Lynseys Addario, kidnapped 2 times, Pulitzer Prize winner, probably has arguably the most visually arresting photography collection I've ever seen when it comes to women. It's equal parts chaotic and gut-wrenching, breathtaking, and optimistic, very much a call to arms. At one point, had a movie that was going to be directed by Steven Spielberg, with you being played as Jennifer Lawrence. I know that's evolved since then in very exciting ways. So to go backwards, to go forwards a little bit, what makes someone go from the comfort of Westport, Connecticut, to the uncertainty and discomfort of Afghanistan to go and meet with the Taliban seemingly overnight? What triggered that?
It's not like I grew up in Westport and dreamed of being a war photographer. That wasn't the case at all. I think my path to covering war was anything but linear. A lot of it had to do with being curious and really sort of loving people and loving different cultures and really just sort of following my curiosity. And so I studied international relations and Italian in college. I went to University of Wisconsin. And then after I moved to Argentina because I wanted to learn Spanish. And there I sort of started becoming aware of powerful photographs in the newspapers and in magazines and in exhibitions. And I realized that I could start to tell stories with photographs. And so I started photographing on the street and traveling and really just started trying to teach myself photography. And then I had a very wise ex-boyfriend at the time who was in journalism school. And he said to me, make all your mistakes in Argentina, because when you get to New York, no one will give you a second chance. So I sort of stayed there for about a year and was really sort of trying to learn as much as I could, and then moved back to New York and started freelancing for the Associated Press and various publications. And then in 2000, I was given the chance to move abroad to India. I went with a family friend and I decided to just stay there. And right away, South Asia presented a whole different range of stories for me. And a lot of them centered on women, women's rights, injustices against women. And that was really interesting to me. So I started covering things in India. And at that point, Afghanistan was under the Taliban. So I, like any other 26-year-old woman, was like, oh, I want to go to Afghanistan and see what life is like for women there. And so I had no money at the time. I had to borrow money from my sister. And I started researching story ideas and access possibilities. And I went. And that trip was really sort of formative for me because it was the first time I was in a country that there was no US embassy. If something went wrong, I had no one to turn to, really. It was under Taliban rule. And so there were so many issues. Photography was illegal of any living thing. I had to sneak around with my cameras in a bag. And I was able to navigate that and come away with a few photos, obviously not great photos because this is over 20 years ago and I was just starting to learn how to have a voice as a photographer. And that triggered sort of a whole new range of curiosity for me, especially working in places where people are oppressed and women in particular.
So many women are so much more expandable than they realize. If they could just kind of punch out of their little bubble, there's this magnificent world that awaits them. Do you believe in doing that incrementally over time? Do you believe in driving drastic change if you want to make a life change?
I don't think there's one formula that works for everybody. I think that I am the type of person who I am really driven by my work. I'm really driven by sort of the journey to sort of tell people's stories and bring us all onto the same page and to show that there are people who live with zero privilege, who are constantly living in hardship. And that drives me, and that drives me to go out of my comfort zone all the time. But that's not to say that's right for someone else. I mean, everyone is so different. So I think if you're a person who is looking for change, who is looking for something in their life, you have to find your own parameters. Are you willing to give up your personal life? Are you willing to behind the comforts of your home. I mean, it's difficult. It's not a cushy existence. It's not glamorous. Of course, it's rewarding in so many other ways, but I think that we're all so different. So it's hard to say what's good for someone else.
And how do you prepare for a dangerous, scary, foreboding assignment? What does that preparation process look like for you?
All assignments are different. I mean, a lot of the places I go now, I've been many times. So I think a place like Afghanistan or Iraq, for example, was going to cover the war. That equipment is very sort of military-like. It's a flak jacket, which is a bulletproof vest, a helmet. I'm bringing protein bars, a headlamp. I'm bringing all sorts of painkillers in case my back goes out. So I have back issues, which any photographer basically does. I'm bringing coffee. Clothing is all cargo pants and really sort of muted colors. Journalists can't wear camouflage because you never want to be mistaken for being a combatant. So I'm bringing sort of muted colors. If I'm in a Muslim country, I'm bringing long tunics to cover my butt. I am bringing headscarves to cover my hair when I need to. So it really just depends on sort of where. If I'm not embedded with the military, I'm generally not wearing a flak jacket. I'm usually moving around kind of low profile, not with locals. So the goal in that is to not stand out as much as possible. But I'm usually bringing sort of the same sort of thing, my own food, my own coffee, all that stuff.
Mentally, how are you preparing?
I think part of the mental preparation is doing my research. So a lot of what I do leading up to an assignment is I read all of the articles, all sort of that have come out on a situation. I make phone calls to people on the ground, whether they are fixer, local producers, or local journalists, or my colleagues who happen to be there or have left.
So this is switching gears entirely to the worst case scenario, but being on the ground in a war zone, becoming a hostage, you've had a front row seat to terror and fear. What terrifies you most in that moment, or are you not afraid?
I'm definitely afraid. I mean, I think anyone who says they're not afraid in these situations is totally full of shit. My job is sort of knowing the danger spots. What are the possibilities of being kidnapped? What are the possibilities of being shot at? Where is the front line? Where would bullets be coming from? Where would incoming mortar rounds be coming from? Who are the people who would be likely to kidnap us? I think all of this stuff, or even car bombs, all that stuff, we're constantly thinking. Journalists, we're often nowadays in the last 10 years, most publications ask us to travel with security advisors. They are not armed, but they help us sort of make decisions on the ground as to safe and what's not so safe. That's quite helpful because before it used to be us kind of deciding in a vacuum. And of course, we always want kind of the best story, and we're always kind of more prone to take a lot of risks. So I think I'm often very scared, but I think part of my job is knowing how to handle that fear and what to do with it. So it's like when I feel that sort of paralyzing fear come on, I have to say, okay, why am I scared? Am I scared because I have PTSD because I've been doing this so long and I have been kidnapped twice and I have to it's natural for me to be paranoid? Or am I scared because legitimately we are doing something that is very high risk? And once I make that decision, I kind of talk through with whoever I'm working with, my local team. Is this the best decision? Have we stopped and talked to people on the ground about how far forward we want to go? There's a whole process. And I think a lot of it is just kind of working through it. Sometimes if I'm in a gun battle and I'm sort of face down in the dirt, I have to speak to myself out loud in a voice, like literally talk to myself and say, okay, you have to get up, have to get cover, or things that I do, tactics that sort of push myself to get up and move, because sometimes I'm so scared, I don't even run away.
I can imagine that there are times where you almost physically need to move yourself. There's almost this dialogue that's happening with self to say, we got to go because you're in a state of shock. You're in the midst of a traumatic situation. Your body's actually experiencing trauma in that moment. I want to talk to you a little bit about how you endure physically and mentally. So really the stamina of your endurance. You've gone the distance. This isn't just a flash in the pan where you've done a few trips. I mean, you've made a career out of this and keep going back time and time again. How do you run the race for the long haul?
A colleague of mine who I have known since the 90s, who I covered Afghanistan and Iraq with and various wars with, he once said that photographers are like professional soccer players, and the lifespan is like 5 to 7 years because we go through so much, and most people just fall out because they're so messed up or they're just depressed. It's a very difficult lifestyle to maintain because you're dealing with a lot of adrenaline, and then you come home and everything seems very mundane, like, oh, I have to do my laundry. It's not as exciting as being on the front line. We basically live in parallel worlds all the time. And I think for me, my tactic has been listening to my instinct about those times when I need to really step back and I need to sort of take care of my, what means physically or emotionally. Doesn't mean I stop working, but sometimes it means I do different types of stories. I don't exclusively cover war. I cover other stories. I cover refugee stories, women's stories. I mean, often they're tied into conflict in some way, but a lot of them are sort of low risk. And so I think for me, it's really important to kind of step back when I need to and step in when I want to, and to always ask myself, why am I covering this story? You know, what am I contributing to this? Why am I risking my life for this story? Because it is, as much as it's a selfless profession, it's also very selfish because I have 2 kids, I have a husband, I have sisters, I have parents. And every time I go to the front line, it means I'm risking my life and that I might not come home. So I have to really ask myself, why am I doing these stories? And so it's a process, and I am in it for the long haul. I mean, I do think it's important for me to continue covering these stories. These are the stories I care about, but it's also important for me to pull away when I need to.
To perform at the highest level, what do you believe must be true?
One has to believe in what they're doing. I mean, wholeheartedly. There has to be sort of unwavering dedication. I think I need a support network. For me personally, I'm so lucky to have like a very supportive husband and partner and sort of family. I have a big Italian family that I come home to. And I think all of that really feeds into me being able to continue doing this work, to continue risking my life, because I feel I have sort of an incredible network of support. And that's a really important part of this job.
Build is really about helping women lead these very unconventional, unique, non-traditional lives. That's the ultimate aim, is to go off the beaten path a bit. What would you encourage someone to do if they were hungry to wake up more to their life?
Oh God, that's a tough one because I've never, I have to say it's a blessing and a curse, but I've never had a day since I was 21, since I discovered this profession, that I wasn't driven to do something like in terms of this career. So I think first and foremost, a lot of understanding how to be happy and how to live one's life, you have to be in touch with yourself. I mean, one has to really understand what someone's looking for. For me, it's like I believe so deeply in doing these stories that it drives me almost beyond anything else in my life. And sometimes I wish I didn't feel that passionately. Sometimes I just want to be lazy and be home and not do anything. When the pandemic first started and it was sort of March of 2020 and I was in England and the world started down, immediately my thought was, okay, I need to cover this. This is right in line with my work. And that was also terrifying because I was with my family. It wasn't like I was going off to cover a war and not endangering them. But in the case of COVID, I actually was going into ICUs, into funeral homes, and I had to worry about bringing something home to them. So that's a whole other element. I think if someone is sort of wondering what to do with his or her life or how to bring meaning to her life, they have to think about, what do they care about? What is it you want to accomplish when you look back in 20, 30 years? What do you want your personal legacy to be? And the answer to that for everyone will be different.
That's such great advice, though. It begins and ends with you. And so
Yeah.
the first act is really the act of knowing thyself so that you can then take deliberate action around what lights you up most. I'd heard a quote somewhere, it may have been misattributed to you, but do what you love or always be average. What does that mean to you?
Oh no, that's funny. I thought you said do what you love and you'll be happy. My parents used to say that to me all the time. Do what you love and you'll be average. That's interesting. I believe that everyone should always be following their heart and their dreams and sort of what they love, because otherwise, what's the point of life? Some of us have the luxury to do that more than others, of course. But I think if you are in a position to make those decisions and choose to sort of follow a career path that maybe is not so conventional, then I would advocate doing it, because you know sort of what it looks like to work in an office after 20 years. You know what it looks like. You know, everyone knows kind of what that feels like if that's what you're already doing. So why not pick up and make a change if you're up for it, especially if you don't have a family and you're not already tied down with roots somewhere. I'm so grateful that I sort of lived the craziness that I lived in my 20s and 30s before I had kids. I was 38 when I had my first child. It's not like I've stopped, but I basically never went home for 12 years. I just was on the road all the time. And that's harder to do as one gets older.
So I can't sit down with one of the greatest storytellers of all time without talking about storytelling. What makes for a good story?
Well, I think it's important to, first of all, for me, there's got to be a reason that I'm telling that story, right? I mean, there has to be a reason that I'm drawn to a story. Most of the stories that I go to tell are about women, are about sort of issues that I feel like with the attention of that story, there could be help or there could be change. And if I don't feel like that's the story I'm doing or the attention I'm bringing to a story will help the situation in any way, it's much harder for me to justify doing that story, because often I'm in a situation where I'm interacting with people at their most vulnerable moments, right? Their most sort of vulnerable points in life. The stories I do are very intimate. People are often reliving trauma. They're often in the midst of trauma. And so I think what makes a good story is getting or offering a perspective to an audience that is intimate, that is something they wouldn't have naturally seen, that maybe educates them or opens up or changes their preconceptions of what they thought of something. I think it's really important to kind of show something new or to really make people care in a way that is profound and not just in a way that's fleeting. Because I think it's really hard now with the society in which we live, where everything is on Twitter or Instagram, everyone has sort of a 5-minute attention span. It's really hard to get people to care about things. And so for me, I think what makes a good story is simply a combination of good photos and words that stop people in their tracks and make them ask questions and makes people curious and makes them care.
The word that comes to mind as you're speaking is resonance. I think this idea of it should continue to reverberate in someone long after they've encountered that story, that it stays with you, it sits with you, it calls you back so that you can potentially take action. How can women in the US, we're often a bit siloed and a bit removed from the rest of the world. And I think it's something I've traveled extensively all around the globe, often alone as a woman on my own. And every time I come back, I'm kind of struck by how insular we are here in the US. What do you think we could do more of to have more global kind of interconnectivity and be more united with other women in the world? What is it going to take to be able to do that?
I've thought about that a lot, particularly because I grew up in Westport, Connecticut. I mean, nothing can seem more far removed from the rest of the world than Westport. Part of the problem is geographically, the US is just so far removed. I live in London and I can be on a train and in 2 hours I'm in Belgium or France. Everything is very connected elsewhere. And there's also these great immigrant communities and places I can go and just sort of be in the midst of so many different cultures and I feel very connected in Europe in a way that I don't feel I'm home in the US. And I think part of that is just have to kind of read more, watch more movies. I think that the sort of recent trend to be watching series and shows and films from South Korea and other countries is great in terms of sort of an exchange of culture. But it's really difficult because I think geographically the US is just so isolated. And I think, I mean, it'd be amazing if we can bring in more speakers from Africa and the Middle East, if we can have more of a cultural exchange, because I think that is the way to really open people's eyes about what life is like in other places, to bring people to the US, different forums, to schools, bring in students from across the world. But that takes a real push and it takes money. You need someone really pushing that. It's hard because we're at a point where people are very wrapped up in their own lives and they're very wrapped up in their own problems, especially after a global pandemic. People have read are more isolated.
From when you started until present day, what would you say makes you more optimistic about the state of women? What has changed?
I have seen women who have been through the most unbelievable hardship, unfathomable hardship, and they just continue to go forward and they find strength in places that I just am constantly in awe of women around the world. And so I think the resilience inspires a lot of hope. I also think the fact that women are finding a voice through social media, whether it's their Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, it's really giving them a platform, especially in sort of patriarchal cultures where women don't usually have a voice. It's very interesting how social media is actually providing a platform for women who haven't usually had a platform. And it's
I
almost sort of emboldening them to do
Yeah, I
more
could not
things.
agree more. I think I think women are taking control of owning their thought leadership, their IP, their platforms, and really deciding that they've got a message that they're going to put out and don't need to turn it over to another media company or entity either, which is really the notion of control and doubling down on oneself. I think is a really
Mhm.
interesting point. I'd love to just hear where you feel most alive today. What is the environment that makes you feel most
I
alive?
mean, as a mother, I guess the answer I should say is like when I'm home with my family. But the reality is, I feel most alive when I'm in the field, two cameras in my hands, waist deep in flood water, or in the middle of a conflict, or interviewing someone who is so grateful to have me help share their voice with the rest of the world. There is nothing that makes me feel happier or more alive. I'm happiest when I'm sort of dirtiest and hungriest and sweatiest and out there working.
Knowing what you know now, I think I know the answer to this question, but was all of this worth it?
Yeah. First of all, I don't believe in regrets. I try never to regret anything. I think that everything is a learning experience. And no matter what goes wrong, I think it's really important to just kind of learn from every experience. And I think in terms of having been kidnapped, having been shot at, having been thrown out of a car on a highway in Pakistan, I mean, these are all my decisions to be in those places. No one forced me to go anywhere. These are my decisions. I know perfectly well what the risks are. And so I choose to live the life I do, and I take those risks and I accept them.
Well, if it's not clear, I have so much reverence for you and your work. For those who are watching, please check out her photography. It will strike you in the best possible way. She's got 2 books out of love and war, and it's what I do. Lynsey, anything you'd like to add?
No, I guess the most important thing is just don't squander your life. Get out there, do what you feel like you need to be doing. Life is short. You have no idea when it will end.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Unbelievable.